Welcome to Season 3 of the Lubin Link, the official podcast of the Lubin School of Business at Pace University. Each episode, we spotlight alumni who have turned their business education into successful careers, sharing advice, insights, and inspiration for our community. I'm Hallie Robke, Assistant Director of Digital and Social Content at Lubin, and your host for today's episode. Today, I'm joined by Addison O'Donnell, a partner at Lois Law Firm, adjunct professor of law, and proud Lubin graduate. Alongside his legal career, Addison is also a musical theater writer. Let's jump in.
All right. Well, Addison, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm really glad to be here.
So just to kick us off, can you tell us a little bit about your journey post-graduation from Pace and what led you towards law school?
Oh boy, sure. Geez, we're starting off pretty deep, huh?
Oh yeah, we get right to it.
So this sounds linear, but it actually, when I was living through it, it was not. I graduated in 2014. I was part of the first cohort of arts entertainment management graduates. And that was very exciting. You know, we had the entire city was our oyster, and we were ready to take it by storm. We had folks in fashion, we had folks in theater, including myself. We had folks going into music. We had some people who wanted to go to the West Coast and do film and marketing, agent and management, fields and whatnot. And so, as for me, I mean, it was pretty quick. It was, trial by fire. I was essentially, producing theater. I was producing readings. I was, independently, I was producing readings, but I was also jumping aboard with various theater companies and organizations as associate producer, including the now defunct New York Musical Theater Festival, NYMF. I love NYMF. And I was essentially, doing what people do after they graduate, hustling. I was subletting, I was writing music, I was composing, I was in a few readings, which was crazy because I'm not an actor, I'm not a performer, I'm more of a writer, I'm more of a producer. But it was a lot of fun. It was really interesting. It was very hard. And then I had to interact with the union, with Actors Equity Association. And, everyone thought that working with unions and contracts, that it was dry and that it was really, boring and to an extent scary. But I thought it was, just terrific. I was, taking delight in reading what the union required. I was trying to negotiate with the union for a specific contract for off-Broadway companies. I was negotiating with certain agents with the union. And I just remember waking up one day saying, what does this mean? I'm pushing paper and I'm talking to people and we're talking about, bargaining agreements and money. And, I just, to be frank, I just wanted to create art, So, when I was thinking about, well, what does this mean? I was thinking about what lawyers do, because lawyers, much like writers, traffic in words. They really use the written word to the advantage of their client. And, I actually don't see that much of a difference between musical writers, right? They use the written word in advantage of of the character that they're trying to portray. So, I was looking into that, and I remember reaching out to mentors and saying, I'm thinking about law school. And this was right after graduation, the first year after graduating. I was experiencing my first few jobs. And, I reached out to people who I very much admired, including the former dean of the business school, Neil Braun. I admired him as a writer, as a thinker. He expressed himself in such articulate ways. And it was so universal that everyone in a room would understand, where he was coming from, and there would be these complexities that he would be able to reduce into fine points that everyone would understand. And he was, I very much admired his thinking, and he was a lawyer. And, the rest is somewhat history. I spoke with him and I said, I'm going to take the plunge and do it.
Well, that's wonderful. Honestly, I've heard so many good things about Neil Braun, so it's really nice to see the stories that our alumni can bring back from his time with the university as well.
Oh yeah, I've got a lot of lore. We're going to discuss a lot of lore in this conversation.
I can only imagine. So that kind of leads us into thinking about to your time at Lubin. What's some of the lessons or skills that you picked up here that still come in handy today?
You know, there's one particular lesson, one particular skill that I can directly attribute to the Lubin School of Business. And it sounds a little squishy. It sounds, it doesn't really sound substantive, but it really is in the real world. And that's I'm not afraid to roll up my sleeves and do the hard work. A lot of corporate environments, a lot of businesses, especially in middle management and below, try to, how do I say this politely and delicately, pass the buck. They play hot potato. They say, oh, this isn't my problem. This will be someone else's problem. And so, you know, I I take the hot potato, right, and I solve the problem. I figure out where to put it down and how to fix it. And that kind of grit, that kind of tenacity, that kind of willingness to solve problems, to address issues head on, to confidently say that the buck stops here was something that Lubin instilled in me. And I think I'd be remiss if I did not mention Dr. Teresa Lant. She specifically, you know, inspired me to take a problem. And by the way, she was the former director of the Arts and Entertainment Management program. She was the founder of the program itself. But she, I saw what she was doing. She was creating this curriculum out of nothing. And, there was no hot potato. There was no pass the buck. It was, I'm going to address this. I'm going to fix it. I'm going to finish it. And I think that kind of lesson, even though it doesn't sound, you know, like a business school lesson, is something that's particularly Pace and particularly Lubin.
Yeah, it's incredible. We've gone through so many changes over the last few years, and many of our students, I'm sure, would agree that one of the main things that you'll always take away from Lubin is being able to pick up from anybody else and just finish whatever the issue is. It's definitely something that I've heard from multiple of our alumni at this point. So that's for sure.
Absolutely. And it translates to the real world. I mean, people notice that. They notice when someone who's in an executive position wants to delegate something or wants to get to a certain end, a certain goal. And when you have someone in the room saying, I'll do it, and not only will I do it, but I'll get it done really well and I'll get it done to the specifications required. People realize that, and it's only an elevator up.
Well, I'm sure you can attest to that since been able to become a partner at, is it Lois Law Firm?
That's right, Lois Law Firm.
Absolutely. And that's a massive achievement. What do you think set you apart in your early career apart from being able to pick up anybody's issues and kind of take them and solve them?
So, I do believe becoming a partner at a law firm this early in my career, it really is one of the great achievements that I've had in my life. I mean, it was a lot of hours working and getting there. It was within a little over 5 years I mean, 5 years in a law firm. You could do it, but you have to put in the hard work. There's very easy lessons there. There are certain things you could do to stand out, like show up early. I mean, that's an easy one. If the doors open at 9 o'clock, you're getting there at 8 and you're bringing your coffee, right? You got to keep your head down and put your nose to the grind. And that's something that I'm particularly proud of when it comes to my reputation, when it comes to what people think of when they think of me is, they know that I really put in the work. I mean what I say and I say what I mean. But I think what set me apart is that I found an angle. And what that means is I wanted and dedicated myself to be an expert in a process that no one knew about. And maybe that no one cared to know about, or maybe that it was too hard to know about. and I wanted to be a specific technician in that well. Um, and I had alluded this in the previous answer, but finding a mentor who is in that space and who shares that same value as you do is important for that kind of success. So there's a partner who took me under her wing at Lois Law Firm. Her name is Tashia Rasul, and she firmly believed that knowledge is power. If you are able to know how to solve a problem, it will, pay off in dividends. Uh, there are riches in the niches. They're in the places where people may not look, in the places where it's a little discreet, a little peculiar. If you're able to really hone in on those things, it could pay back. And I'm very thankful for Tashia, who was a partner when I started, and now she's a colleague. Now she's a fellow partner of this law firm, and I learned a lot from her, how to practice law, essentially, how to bill, how to talk to clients, how to litigate, how to think about a problem and solve it.
That's incredible. We love to hear stories when you go from being the mentee to being somebody who's on an equal playing field with those that were around you and supporting you through your journey. So that's wonderful here.
It's sort of cinematic in a way, you know. I want the song from Legally Blonde to play as the credits roll. It really is. The phrase is, it comes full circle, right? And it
Yes,
absolutely does.
absolutely, absolutely. And speaking of full circle, you've gone from in school to being now a professor as well. What inspired you to go back and start teaching?
Oh, that could be its own podcast in and of itself. So, you know, um, the first thing is this. I've always been drawn toward teaching. I've always been drawn toward opening the door for other people and communicating with other people, inspiring other people to come away with a lesson and, I mean, ultimately do the right thing, right? Do the thing that helps them in the world, and that furthers them, that inspires them. And I often say that teaching is a sacred profession, and it's almost a duty. It rises to the level of a duty for lawyers to give back to the legal profession, especially in times like these, right? So, a friend of mine connected me to someone at New York Law School, the professor of law from practice. Her name is Professor Ann Baker. And Ann and I are birds of a feather. We had a 90-minute phone call that was supposed to be 15 minutes or so. And we were talking about active writing and prepositional phrases and practice and war stories from working with thorny lawyers and judges. And she actually put my name forward for an adjunct position to teach appellate advocacy, because that's my specialty. I mentioned, there in the niches there are riches. I attached to the appellate process. That's really where I'm home. I'm an appellate specialist. And so, Anne, she took me under her wing. She's showing me all the ropes. She introduced me to lesson plans, how to prep a class, how to explain complex issues quickly, and um, she put my name forward, and it was a great match. I mean, I started teaching advanced appellate advocacy this past January, and they asked me to teach it again this upcoming January. And now I'm teaching a legal writing course on Zoom, by the way. This is a byproduct of the post-COVIDian world, right? Where you're not afraid to enroll in an online class. You're not getting a second-rate professor teaching you, an easy A, if you will. It is a legitimate course where, that's an art form in and of itself, using the whiteboard, using breakout rooms, using share screen. So that's really what got me into it, and I love it. I love it. And yeah, it takes up my weekends. Yeah, it takes up my evenings. Yeah, in the spring semester, I have 2 hours that I got to stay later at the office, but I really think, it's somewhat of, what's the word? It's an avocation. It's something that goes beyond what what you do just as your vocation.
I think many of our faculty would agree with you on that. They are very dedicated to giving back to our student body. And then you mentioned that it takes up your weekends and your evenings, and you're so busy during the day as well. How do you find time to keep writing? I mean, you write musicals for that are fantastic and amazing, and you are just so busy. So how do you find the time? How do you find the inspiration to keep pursuing that?
You know, it's a great question. What's the quote from Hamilton? Why do you write like you're running out of time? No, it's so part of it is finding the passion for it. But part of it that I find has to do with structure and organization. And maybe this is something that I learned from Lubin, to be frank. I'm able to make order out of chaos in a way that is economical, that, is obtainable, that is manageable. Anytime I sit down to do creative writing or writing music or lyrics, I have a very rigid process to do it, much like I do with legal writing, much like I do with preparing for uh, class. I have an hour. What am I going to do the first 20 minutes, the second 20 minutes, the third 20 minutes, or something? I outline what I want to do first. A lot of people say the blank page, right? The blank page is the scariest thing. And it's actually not when you have another page that has an outline of what you want to do on it. And then eventually an hour passes by like that. And then I need another hour, right? So it all comes down to organization. And again, now that I'm piecing it together, it really comes from the tenacity and grit. It comes from a certain sense that you want to do what you want to do. I'm not watching Love Island or any of the brain candy that's out there. I'm specifically picking and choosing my time and knowing it won't be a waste. And sometimes it could be, but I take that risk.
Even if you're wasting your time, at least you're doing something that you love to do. It's never a waste as long as you're happy.
Oh, I love it. I mean, I can go into my love of writing musicals, and I could just that could be its own episode. Um, it's musicals are such a poetic art form, and it's uniquely American, uniquely New York. Um, it's the combination of storytelling and almost the progeny of classical music. It's almost the heir apparent to you know Mozart, Chopin, Rachmaninoff, Gershwin, Sondheim, right? It's the tradition of making music, and it's still a developing medium. That's the coolest part about it, is that it's not over, and it won't be over because it's been developing for millennia. It's quite exciting.
It absolutely is. And it's very New York. Like you said, it's the lifeblood of many of our students here as well, especially with our performing arts school and everything else going on. It's definitely huge.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And then, so bringing us kind of back to your time with Lubin, obviously business and law are consistently overlapping. Can you share an example of where your business knowledge gave you a little bit of an edge in your legal career?
You know, there's a lot. So the first thing is that a management degree, a business degree, the greatest gift that comes from that is the confidence in proposing new ideas. Because thinking like someone who's in commerce, in business, you have to think of the entire meal, soup to nuts. Here's my idea. Here's how it will work and run. Here's the expectation. Here's what happens if it doesn't work. Here's plan B. Here's plan C. Overall, the statistics of one working over the other is X, Y, and Z. When when you think about a management degree, in the legal field, most lawyers, they don't have a technical education. A business degree is a technical degree, right? Lawyers come in with a philosophy background, political science, history, English. It is qualitative in nature. And there are aspects of the business degree that are qualitative in nature as well. But a business degree has finance, accounting, calculus, cost managerial accounting, right? Those are demanding fields. There's no way you could skate by in those areas. And so when you think about a holistic education and when you think about per se right brain, left brain, which I don't necessarily ascribe to, that kind of perspective is almost invaluable in a legal career because you're able to advise somebody qualitatively, but you're also able to give the perspective to determine the exposure of a client, of a plan. And when I mean exposure, I mean risk. And that's a numbers thing. That's not necessarily a gut thing, an intuitive thing. And so, when I think of examples, I just think of so many examples. I mean, I've been in meetings where we would talk about strategy, and I would come out and consider the financial and the managerial aspects of the strategy and the implications and how to advise accordingly. And that kind of dynamic thinking and outlined thinking, right? It really does underscore the overlap between business and law, if that makes sense. I don't want to belabor that, and I think I'll just leave it there. I don't think that there could just be one example, but it helps on a person-to-person basis. That's either with an adversary, that might be someone in your own business, that might be with your client, that might be with a judge, right? Here are the implications. Map it out, articulate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's definitely, there's a lot of overlap there. And I think a lot of our students would find the same values in it that you do.
Right.
Speaking of our students, what is one thing you wish you had known when you were still a student here?
One.
I know the list can go on and on forever.
Do you know the song by Billy Joel called Vienna?
Vaguely, but not in
So
detail.
there is a song by Billy Joel called Vienna, and the lyrics go, "Slow down, you crazy child. You're so ambitious for a juvenile. But then if you're so smart, then tell me why are you still so afraid? What's the fire? What's the hurry about? You better cool it off before you burn it out. You've got so much to do and only so many hours in a day." I think that encapsulates what I know now that I wish I knew back then. You know, Dear Addison, your next step is not your last step. And just because you're not doing what you exactly want to do right now doesn't mean that you're never going to do it eventually. Patience does pay off, with planning. With planning, you can't just sit there and wait for nothing. You have to plan it out, and everything will settle down. Everything will settle down.
I absolutely agree with that. I think, especially what you said, patience, but patience with planning. I always loved the phrase opportunity will come knocking, but the other side of that is opportunity won't knock if you don't have the door and the pathway for it to get there.
That's right. That's right. And pace, what's the pace slogan? Opportunitas, right? And
Absolutely.
yeah, absolutely.
And then just kind of to wrap us up, we look back, but now let's look ahead. What excites
Sure.
you the most about the future, whether that's in law or teaching or even with your creative projects?
Sure. So, what excites me generally is reinterpretation, reinvention, evolution, and revolution, right? That's what draws me to law, to theater, to teaching. So there's a couple of things. The first is, and I'm quoting one of my old mentors, Kim Wolf Price, when she says, your career should be a patchwork quilt. It should be a patchwork of skills, a narrative-based, picturesque mosaic, because meaning only comes with reflection and hindsight. And so when you find your own way to do your own pattern, that is very exciting. And I am an elder millennial, and millennials are disruptors, but Gen Z are the true agents of change. I've never seen anything like it, and it actually excites me. Um, I know some people might be salty about it, as they say, but I really do think that Gen Z has the ability to change the world, has the ability to reinvent, to reinterpret, to evolve, and you know and to change. And so when I think of law, for example, that's a 2.5 century old tradition that I'm a part of. And it's still evolving, interpreting, inventing. Uh, that's an exciting thing to be a part of it. With teaching, I believe it was Oscar Hammerstein who said, by your pupils, you will be taught. I learn more from my students' lessons than they learn from me. And, that really gets me, that touches me. Because there's always a new semester and a new subject matter to teach. And I guess with my creative endeavors, what I'm most excited about, I'm going to be working on probably my most personal creative endeavor in 1 to 2 years. Usually when I write something that's totally removed from my daily life, a slice of life that is somewhere else out there that I don't know anything about. And I intend to write something, I call it my tick, tick, boom. I intend to write something that, is personal and quasi-autobiographical. And so we will see.
Well, you'll absolutely have to let us know whenever that comes to fruition and we can know more details about it. I won't ask because I know you probably won't tell.
Next time, I promise. You'll only hear it here. You'll hear it here.
Well, Addison, thank you so much for joining me today. It was really a true pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me. This was great.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of The Lubin Link. Thanks for tuning in. Are you looking to connect with Addison? You'll find all his details in the show notes of this episode. Don't forget to subscribe to the show so you never miss the latest insights, stories, and game-changing advice from Lubin's best and brightest.